I can't see the PowerPoint. So in today's class, we are going to understand about psychoanalysis, gender, and media. How all three are interrelated. So when we're talking about psychoanalysis in today's class, we will look into it from the film theory of a very famous person called Laura Mulvey. So psychoanalysis entered into film theory in 1970s with Laura Mulvey's paper, which she wrote for a journal, and the title of the paper was Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. She wrote this in 1975. Initially, its core concepts like the id, the ego, and the superego which were established by Sigmund Freud, had a continuous influence in this paper. So, any one of you who knows what is id, ego, and superego, the structural theory. It is a structural theory. That anyone who is aware what it is and would like to share. Anyone who has studied psychology in your school days. Okay. So very briefly,
It
yeah.
talks.
Come up,
It
come up.
talks. It is basically this thing. It works on the principle which is called instant gratification. I mean, it is like doesn't teach any permission. It's a child wants ice cream. The it will promote prompt a behavior like go for it without asking from an elder that can I eat this ice cream. The ego is basically what we are. I mean, ego is on works on a very rational level. If a child wants an ice cream, ego will ask mom, can I have it, and then have it. Super ego is like a where it works on the principle like very moral values. Basically, everything like how your society taught us to behave and all. So superego comprises all these social values and the values we are taught from our childhood.
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely. So this was a theory by Freud in 1921 when he wrote about it. So very briefly, I'll just summarize what she has mentioned. The id is present at birth as a repository of basic instincts, which Freud called drive. He wrote as TRIEBE, which means drives, which drives you to do something, which is unorganized and unconscious. It operates merely on the pleasure principle, without realism or foresight. I enjoy doing it, therefore I'm doing it. Right? So that is it. The ego develops slowly and gradually, being concerned with mediating between the urging of the id and realities of the external world. Urging of the id, as she mentioned, can I have the ice cream? I want the ice cream is id, and I really want it is id. But but then slowly you realize that I need to ask my mother the way she mentioned, and the realities of the external world. It thus operates on a reality principle, right? It is on pleasure principle, ego is on reality principle, and the superego is held to be the part of the ego in which self observation, self criticism, and other reflective and judgmental facilities develop. The ego and the superego are both partly conscious and partly unconscious. It's right. So you are conscious about things. You're not conscious about things. All these things does work with you. You do some certain things consciously, and you do many things unconsciously also. So this is about a structural thing. Then what is psychoanalysis? What does the word psychoanalysis mean? Okay.
Psychoanalysis is the study of understanding the relationship between ego and the subconscious mind.
Yes, we can say so. Psychoanalysis is a type of therapeutic treatment that developed as a precursors to modern psychology and psychiatry. Psychoanalysis was first developed as a practice by Sigmund Freud in 1890s. Although other practitioners later developed different schools of thoughts and approaches to the practice, uh, but psychoanalysis relies on the theory of the unconscious, in which someone's thoughts and actions are rooted in instinctual impulses of which they are not consciously aware. Moreover, when those drives surface, most individuals would respond with defense mechanism to prevent themselves from becoming truly aware of them. They don't want to accept it. And when this thing happened, when this conflict between the conscious mind and the repressed unconscious behavior, when there is a conflict between both, according to this theory, it can lead to some problems. And these problems are can be anxiety, these problems can be depression, neurosis, hysteria. And it is worth noting that some of the conditions psychoanalysis was developed to treat have since been analyzed through newer scientific models of mental illness, while others have been largely debunked or otherwise reconceived by the scientific community. So those who are the practitioners of psychoanalysis, they believe that the unconscious was revealed through dreams and unintentional actions, such as accidentally saying something other than what was intended. जिसको हम बोलते हैं Freudian slip. If this material could be surfaced and brought into the conscious mind, the tension between consciousness and unconsciousness and unconscious mind could be resolved. So, and why is there a conscious self and unconscious self? And why is it that you suppress some of your feelings, which creates such problems? Why is it so?
Ma'am, because those concepts often as appropriated by the society,
Because
accommodate
few things
ourselves in
happen.
the society, and to be a
Exactly.
part of it. We have to come up with ways to suppress those feelings so that we won't be excluded from the society.
Exactly. Exactly. Because if you want to be acceptable in society, society guides you that you need to behave in a particular manner, in a particular style. Therefore, you suppress most of your thoughts, desires, and fantasies, so that the analyst could so that the society can look at you in a particular manner the way you want to. And when the treatment of anxiety, depression, what are the causes of all these things happen, the analysts probe your dreams, your thoughts, your fantasies, and then they try to help them to understand what might be revealed about their unconscious or subconscious mind. So this is structural theory, psychoanalysis, everything. But when we are studying about media and psychoanalysis together, these two frameworks provide the film theorist with ways of thinking about how the viewer as a subject participates in the meaning of the film, right? So now you have understood we have eight ego, super ego, we have psychoanalysis. We don't need to go in depth because we are not getting into the treatment part or anything like that in psychology. What we are looking for is we are looking for how psychoanalysis works in media, and we're trying to understand it with one film theory. So these are the two elements. One is semiotics. What is semiotics? Semiotics is a theory of signs, a tool of analyzing how meaning is produced through language and ideology. what kind of language we are using in the films and media, what kind of signs we are showcasing. That is semiotics, right? And psychoanalytic theory is a theory of a subject as constituted through sexual differences. And we are trying to do it with help of a narrative by Laura Mulvey. Yeah, she is Laura Mulvey. So what do we actually want to study when we are talking about Laura Mulvey? So Laura Mulvey wrote an essay, as I said, in 1970s, and the name of the essay was "Visual Pleasure in Narrative Cinema." And she believes that through dream analysis, Freud interpreted repressed fears and desires of patients. And similarly, there are several sexual desires which are portrayed with help of cinema or films. So Mulvey argued that, like how dreams are structured by subconscious, film form is structured by society's patriarchal tendencies. Freud defined Oedipal complex, in which the child sees him or herself in the mother and identified through her. Similarly, there was another person called Lacan, Lacan. Lacan, he defined the mirror stage, in which small children recognize themselves in the mirror as opposed to the mother, thus seeing their body as a whole instead of as unconnected body parts. Right? So they many times kids look into the mirror and they try to behave like their mother, thus seeing their body as a whole instead of unconnected body parts. Due to its fundamentally narcissistic nature, the mirror stage is incomplete and stable. Lacan, in his theory, argues that it must therefore be filled in through imagination. The imagination is a fantasy construction in which the individuals conceive perfect self and thoughtful life desires to, to return to this point. According to Lacan, we use temporary gratification such as sex, food, and other aspirations to fill this void. And when the individual develops imagination and the ego, they begin to identify from external ideal point of view of a symbolic other than justice. So Mulvey, actually what she wants to do is Mulvey uh, tries to bring all these things together. She's a highly acclaimed British film theorist, and this paper was published in a journal named as Scream, and later it was published at multiple different places. So Mulvey, who is actually a British film theorist as well as a feminist, who is currently a professor in University of London, uh, she got heavily influenced by Freud and Lacan and their theories, and thereby influencing the perspective of film theory towards a more psychoanalytic framework. And her scholarship was the first to mesh towards the three concepts of film theory: psychoanalysis and feminism. Film theory, psychoanalysis, and feminism. So this is exactly what we are trying to do, is to study from in this section of our syllabus. We're trying to see media and talking about film theory, which is a part of media. We're talking about psychoanalysis, and we're looking at gender, which is a feminism thing. So in fact, her essay used Freud and Lacan's concept as political weapons, and she also argues that the classical Hollywood cinema assumes that the viewer is masculine, matching up with the male protagonist, and always places a female into the position of desire. This is a patriarchal setup, and all the protagonists are male, and females are always shown in a position of desire. Um, though only mentioned several times throughout the essay, Sigmund Freud is an integral part of Mulvey's work. In this theories of symbolic castration, eroticization, fetishization with which Mulvey formulates her approach. And she does so through the lens of psychoanalysis, a school of thought which Freud developed himself. Instead of referring back to Freud repetitively, Mulvey expands and stretches his work and relegates the man to a background role. In this sense, Sigmund Freud is like a director of Mulvey's essay. He is not featured on screen, but is incredibly important behind the camera. And similarly, she did with Lacan's work. She theorized Lacan's work of mirror theory. So in the essay, she analyzes this essay was written to analyze the pleasure and beauty in order to annihilate it. Her essay actually argues that there needs to be new filming strategies that incorporate feminist methods in order to end the male-centric Hollywood system that provides narrative pleasure. You narrate the film or you narrate the story of a media in such a manner that it gives a pleasure to a kind of sexual pleasure to the audience. The way Kamla Bhasin mentioned in her interview as well, that when I was looking at some women dancing on erotic songs, such as मैं तो तंदूरी मुर्गी हूँ मुझे अल्कोहल से गटका ले, it was no less than a soft porn. So imagine who is the viewer of such kind of cinema, who is the viewer of such kind of media. Is it specially made? Are such songs specially made keeping a female in mind? That what if female viewers will watch this character on screen acting and dancing and moving like in a particular direction, or the filmmaker is very well aware that this kind of action or this kind of representation of a female character on screen is definitely for a visual pleasure of male audience, right? So Mulvey's main argument in visual pleasure and narrative cinema is that Hollywood narrative films use women in order to provide a pleasurable visual experience for men. The narrative film structures its gaze as masculine. So she says, she gave it a name called a male gaze. That whatever is showing on screen is a result of male gaze. Is this woman is characterized like this or dressed up like this or is acting in a particular manner for male gaze. The woman is always the object of the ratifying gaze, not the bearer of it. They do not consider the female audience as a bearer of spectator. They don't consider female audience as spectators. They are add-ons. So the films are made keeping in mind the male spectators and to rectify and to satisfy their gaze. Am I making sense to you? Yes or no? Right.
Yes, ma'am.
So I don't have anything else to show you on the screen. So the cinematic gaze is always produced a masculine both by means of identification produced with the male hero and through the use of the camera. Male is a hero, and what is the camera? What is camera doing? Who is camera? Camera are are shown as the eyes of spectators, male spectators, not female spectators. They're not under consideration. Camera, wherever the camera moves, whatever the camera sees, is camera is the eye of spectators. So wherever the camera moves on the body of a woman is on the behalf of the male spectator. So Mulvey identifies two manners in which Bollywood cinema produces pleasure, manners in which arise from different mental mechanisms. The first involves the objectification of the image, and the second one, the identification with it. So, what do we mean and understand the objectification of the image? Objectification simply means you you make a particular figure, woman figure, into an object in a very literal manner, in a very literal manner, as if there are some advertisements in media which show women like a beer bottle. So woman is there, and she is, and in the image is so much merged with the beer bottle that it seems that she's a part of that, right? So it objectifies that. So when we're talking about the language and psychology and media, there's objectification there as well. It, as in Kamla Bhasin's narrative, you saw how she talks about the song "Main to Tandoori Murgi Hoon." So what is she doing? She's objectifying herself into a, not as a human being or a lady or a woman. I am Tandoori Murgi, right? So she's objectifying herself into something which can be used for pleasure. So this is objectification of the image. And the second one, the identification with it. That you identify with that objectification, that I, and if you go with the second line of this song, with Tandoori Murgi Hoon, that Kale Mujhe alcohol se. That is identify. Identify, okay, you identify me as a Tandoori Murgi, and then you identify that you can relish me with a glass of wine. Hmm? So you are identifying it with that. So both mechanisms represent the mental desires of none other than male subjects. The first form of pleasure relates to what Freud also termed as scopophilia. So what is scopophilia? Scopophilia, or the pleasure derived from subjecting someone to one's gaze. देखने से जो pleasure मिलता है. The second form of pleasure, other which operates along the scopophilia, is the identification with represented characters, which is brought out by needs of stemming from the Freudian ego. Scopophilia in films is a structure which functions on an axis of passive, active, with a man always on the active gazing side on the woman, and woman on the passive side. We can say that to be looked atness side. Men is always active and is looking at the person, at the woman in all the films. And woman is always on the other side, is being portrayed like on a passive who is a receiver of such male gaze, to be looked at ness side. And this is done in two completing manners, with both the male figures as a protagonist within the structure, and the camera. So not only the man within the film is doing that, not only the man as a hero in the film is doing that, it is also the camera looking at the woman and directing the viewers, objectifying gaze. Camera is the one who is focusing on various parts of women, is like telling them that now you need to look here, now you need to look here, now you need to stress here, you need to pause here to look at this part of the body. And in plain words, if I say the woman in the film is meant to be looked at, so all the entries of the woman in film and media is always from that angle. अगर हवा चली बाल उड़े फिर चेहरा दिखा, या चुन्नी उड़ गई, या कुछ सामान गिर गया और फिर धीरे धीरे उठ रही है. So these are the entry points of woman. Even if she is driving a bullet, it is not shown. It is always shown in a very seductive manner. And the way she takes off her helmet, even if you want to break the stereotype, if the way she takes off her helmet and then she moves her head so that her hair fall on her face, and then the man is looking at her. Wow. And it is very rare in media that the man enters like that and the woman says, "Oh wow." It doesn't happen. I can't come up with any such examples. If you can, please mention that. And even if they are there, they are very, very minimalist. So the distinction between the passive woman and active man is also manifested in the structure of a cinematic narrative. The films, Mulvey surveyed in doctoral essays, revolves around the dominant male figure with which the viewer can identify. The identification is similar to Lacan's mirror stage also, in which the narcissistic, fragmented, subjected experiences himself and whole and potent in a reflected self-image. Methods that produce cinematic realism aid in the mirror, like identification, which reinforces the ego. So, what Mulvey did, according to her, the female cinematic figure is a paradoxical one. She combines attraction with the playing on deep fears of castration. The male subconscious has two ways of escaping his fear of castration. One is the demystification of the female figure, is the dismantling of her mysteries. In film, the female figure is punished or saved by a male figure. So, in a Freudian concept, the man is always afraid of being castrated, according to Freud. He wants to, जिसको हम अगर अपनी भाषा में बोले, हम मर्दानगी पे आँच ना आए वाली चीज पे बात कर सकते हैं, तो मैं Indian perspective. And what do they do to prove that they are man enough? Are in films, they try to show that they are superior, they are more powerful, therefore they are the ones who go and save the woman. Because their presence will not allow anything wrong to happen with the female character in the film. And in their absence, or maybe if someone else who has the power to harm the female is again the man, because he wants to again prove his power of manliness, right? And why they want to prove the power of manliness? Because they are afraid of fear of castration. This is what this theory expresses. The way to escape fear of being castrated by a woman is through the word called fetishization for her, for instance, as a glamorous, unobtainable star. So, um, films, according to Mulvey, attempt to resolve the tension between attracted to women and fearing them. Therefore, they provide for the need of the masculine form of desire. This is what Laura Mulvey says. She also added on to one of more concept called body chopping. Body chopping doesn't mean actually cutting the body parts, but what in her narrative she emphasizes is that in cinema, in media, in gender, in advertising field, you try to chop the body parts, or you choose to show particular body parts to sell your product or to sell your film or media. You do not show a woman in a holistic manner, woman as a body, woman as a person with mind or brain, or who can think, who can speak. You show woman as body parts. So you chop her body into different parts, and then you show and portray it to the society. You show her lips, and even if it is an advertisement of lipstick, you only focus on lips. You do not show her personality per se. You emphasize on her chopped lips, right? So this is how the body chopping takes place. Uh, and by saying so, Laura Mulvey emphasizes that you want to emphasize, you focus on this is a very cruel form of objectification. You do not see her as a person, as a person with brain who can speak, who can behave in the society. In a similar manner, Kamla Bhasin also mentioned in the video कि आप उसको एक शरीर को देखते हो, आप उसको एक जहन, एक सोच की तरह क्यों नहीं देखते? When she narrates it in the essay, in her narrative, right? So this is how the psychology based on Lacan and Freud and Laura Mulvey gets merged when they are trying to portray gender in and media, right? I have many more things to say here and to elaborate on, but as of now, I will stop here, and we will further try to understand it from this different perspectives in our next classes. Any questions?
Ma'am,